Morning, everybody. My name is Robert Reynolds. I'm a lead PM on the Windows Azure Pack team and the Azure Stack team. We'll talk about the fact that those are different and one and the same at the same time. I'm pretty excited this week because we finally get to name and talk to you guys about the thing that we've been working on for the last year in Azure Stack, and give you guys an update on what's going on with Windows Azure Pack as well. And I've been doing these sessions for the last year, and I usually have about 20 minutes of content on what we're doing around Windows Azure Pack, and I knew all this stuff that we were working on what is now Azure Stack. And I couldn't talk to you guys about it, and it, frankly, it sucked. And now we can talk to you guys about it. And the strategy has remained the same. Before the job that I have now, I worked on the strategic planning team for Windows Server, System Center, and kind of the private cloud technologies. We've had this consistency promise, and we've been working on it, and our goals remain the same. Our first priority is to bring technologies out of our Azure data centers and bring them to your data centers. And that's what we did with Windows Azure Pack. It brought the Gen 1 portal from Azure, some of the services like websites from Azure to your data centers. And the goal is to enable consistent development and operations so that you or your developers that are using the services in your data center can create artifacts, build your skills, and then those skills and those artifacts will be directly transferable between what you're doing in your own data center, what you could do in a third-party service provider data center that's providing cloud platform services, or Microsoft Azure itself. And we want to build this hybrid ecosystem. So we don't want to be the only provider in the world of these APIs. We want you to be able to provide them, and then we want third parties. So when you think about your choices for how you deliver your private cloud, you have choices about whether you run it or somebody else runs it for you in their data centers, or if you want choice when it comes to public access to these APIs, you have choice there as well. And so building that ecosystem, and most of the work that we've done in Windows Azure Pack has been around the provider ecosystem. So helping people get it into their data center. We have a pretty big program that's standing up public service providers that are offering the Azure Pack APIs publicly so that you have choice where you get those and run those. Now, we've been kind of on the baseline of this curve. There is consistent technology from Azure. There are consistent APIs, but we would all say that they're definitely not as consistent as we want. And as Azure evolves, that level of consistency continues, the separation of consistency, or the level, kind of is still low. And clicker. Now, a bunch of you have made investments in Windows Azure Pack, and we interact with you either directly or we hear from you through our user voice site on what you believe is missing and important that you want us to work on in Azure Pack. And so we look at that. We look at the direct interaction that we have with customers who have blocking issues. They're preventing them from getting to production. And that's fundamentally what drives the work that we do in our update releases. And so we deliver quarterly update releases for Windows Azure Pack, and we are going to continue to do that. We have announced Azure Stack. Talk about that in a sec. But that is not the end of Azure Pack. Azure Pack will continue to exist. It will continue to be updated on our quarterly release schedule, and it will support Windows Server vNext capabilities and System Center vNext capabilities, so that if you've made that investment, you can continue to grow the value with that solution stack, and you can continue to get return on that investment that you've made. Now, at the same time, our goal is to deliver consistency, to fulfill more and more of that promise every time we deliver code for you guys. Azure Stack, Microsoft Azure Stack, is a significant step forward in delivering consistency to your data center. We're actually bringing a lot more Azure code, and we're bringing the latest Azure code to your data center. So if you go to Azure today, go to manage.azure.com, you see the classic portal. It looks a lot like the Windows Azure Pack portal because it's got a lot of the same code in it. That's sitting over a service management API. You might have heard it called RDFE if you're talking to a Microsoft person about it. And that's setting over a set of resource providers that are providing those classic services. And in fact, there's more services in that architecture today than there are in the new architecture at this point in Azure. Now, if you go to portal.azure.com, there's the pretty new portal, there's Azure Resource Manager APIs, and then there's the evolution of the service RPs so that they are supporting the Azure Resource Manager API access. And we'll talk about what all that does when I get to the Azure Stack portion of this talk. So there's a new set of IaaS APIs that were announced last week. Mark Rusinovich did a great session. It wasn't in the keynote, but it was like one of the first sessions after the keynote on Wednesday of last week at Build, where he goes through and talks about ARM, and he talks about what we internally are calling IaaS v2 and PaaS v2. So this is the evolution of those services in the new architecture, and with a whole bunch of enhancements that are directly driven by the interaction and the learnings that we've had by servicing customers, thousands and millions of resources created, I guess gazillions if you're talking about storage. But there's lots that we've learned in Azure around the classic service providers, and all of that's being kind of incorporated into these next generation APIs. Now, what's also happening is those next generation APIs are being designed to be delivered on premise in Azure Stack. And so there's direct code sharing between what is live in Azure, what just went to public preview in Azure, and what we're demoing over in Azure Stack this week. Right? And so this is a big thing for us. We've got to figure out how, when those guys deliver code updates every day, how we're going to first get efficient ourselves at making sure that code runs well on premise, and then making sure that we can get that code to you and it will run well in your data center and roll out without downtime for your customers. Because if we don't figure that out, then consistency will run into the same problem where Azure will continue up this curve, and we'll have a consistent set of capabilities. So we're working on that, and we know that that's on us to deliver that consistent stream of APIs so that you can not deliver Azure in your data center the day we give you the product, but 3 months later, you'll still be delivering consistent APIs. And 9 months later, you'll be delivering consistent APIs, right? And on a continuous basis, you'll be getting from us these new APIs that Azure is developing based on customer feedback about that, and we'll be taking your feedback and incorporating that in as well. So Microsoft Azure Stack is a significant step forward for our strategy. But first, I really want to talk about what we're doing in Windows Azure Pack. Probably everybody in this room is familiar, but Windows Azure Pack is a free download. It has 2 portals in it, an admin site, a tenant site, a service management API that gives access to a set of services. In our box is websites for scalable web hosting, database as a service for SQL and MySQL, service bus, and then we have a set of partners that deliver RPs that can be plugged in as well. And then when you combine that with Windows Server and System Center, you get infrastructure services, so VMs and networks and automation. All of this is really about delivering kind of the things that are on the right, which are the capabilities that when we look at what enterprises want and who want to be cloud service providers internally to their own internal customers, and when we talk to public service providers that want to be public cloud providers, these are a common set of things, and these are a set of things that we have in Azure, and we're bringing that technology, even with Windows Azure Pack, on-prem. It was just based on the first generation of the Azure architecture. So we service every quarter. Since release, we've shipped 6 update releases. These are released simultaneously with the System Center update releases for System Center 2012 R2. And we do that because we validate the IaaS stack before we release the updates together. But every one of those has included not only fixes and quality enhancements, but functional enhancements, right? Because we're bringing new capabilities, we're listening to you guys, and we're getting driven. So for IaaS, in every UR except the very first one, we've delivered new capabilities based on customer feedback. And the latest UR6, which was available, I guess, a week ago today, we introduced VM Checkpoint Restore. I'll demo that in a second. And Gen 2 VM roles. So Gen 2 VM support with VM roles. These are things that are directly taken from our user voice sites. Both the Azure Pack user voice site and the VMM user voice site, right? So we actually add the votes to see what features are going to have the most bang for buck. So when it comes to database as a service, especially around SQL Server, the big enhancement release was UR5. So this is where we brought in the SQL Server 2014 resource governor capabilities so that not only could you have access isolation for multi-tenancy, but you can have performance isolation for multi-tenancy. And this was driven again by feedback from people who were deploying database as a service in production and saying, I love the access, but I can still have one guy slam a server and affect the performance of my other tenants. And so with the latest capabilities in SQL Server 2014, we're able to give so that you can define SLAs that you want to make sure that you can guarantee. and offer that as part of the plans that you offer around database as a service. And then we've been doing website updates, and a pretty significant update in UR6 has brought a whole lot of kind of core code back down from Azure and added 2 pretty significant features. One is web jobs, which allows kind of background tasks to be created and run behind other than just kind of the normal browser interaction with the website. And then the other is deployment slots. And so this allows you to have staging and then be able to swap out the stages, so you can say, I've got a pre-production version of that website, and I've got a production version of that website. I've validated the pre-production, now swap them, and that becomes production, right? So you can have your go-to-production process kind of encapsulated in the website's service. And this is added to all of the integrations with Visual Studio and GitHub and all of the other things that are kind of already there for websites. So those are kind of things that we've delivered. Let me switch real quick. So here I'm going to log on to Windows Azure Pack instance that we use. It's running UR6, and it's actually using ADFS integration for identity. So in this case, it's the Fabricam instance, but we've also federated it with Microsoft, so that I can log in with my Microsoft credentials as a tenant. So effectively, single sign-on from my Windows 10 desktop. I work on down level, of course, as well, but directly into the Windows Azure Pack portal. Now, the new feature that I want to talk about, by the way, we love Linux, if nobody's told you. But the new feature I want to show you is the new buttons at the bottom, which are the ability to have a checkpoint operation and a restore operation. So right now I have this Linux VM. It's running out there. Let me connect to it, right? So what I'm about to do is RDS into the text console of a Linux machine. And then I'm cool, so I get to log in as root. So here I am logged in as root. I can go to the root directory, show you guys what's there, touch a file. We love Linux. Well, you don't have to dot, but just for compatibility's sake, I'm going to call it .text. So now when we see that, so I'm logged in here. Let me switch back real quick. And so that's a live VM real quick. Okay, so one more thing. Now, sometimes, well, actually, let me go take a snapshot real quick. Let me go back while that's running. I say, make a checkpoint, friendly name, protect the one we love. Linux is fun. Okay. So, just went out and created a checkpoint for that. If I go to restore, that didn't show up. Let me try again. Protect the one we love. Really work this time. Okay, so I got a warning because one already existed, but now it's going off to create the checkpoint. Now, I can see the status, just like normal for other things. Oh, we're done. Okay, so now that we've protected the one we love, let's go back. Oops. And, sometimes we hurt the ones we love. So as root, I'm going to rm -rf star from the root directory. So if you're not familiar with Linux command line, what I'm doing is I'm removing every file in this Linux VM with root authority. I'm recursing every directory, and I'm forcing so that it's not going to ask me any, silly questions. So, sometimes you can do very bad things to the ones you love. So when I start that, the first thing that starts hitting is, hey, there's all these devices that we're running in memory in the kernel, right? And you can't delete those. But anything that's on the file system is basically getting whacked. Now, this is bad. If I did this with a VM without a checkpoint, this VM would be done. I'd start over, right? So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my VM, log back here, come back in. Ruh-roh. I might have heard it bad. I might have heard it really bad. Hey, look, I'm still deleting everything. Error. All right, I know. Let me try one more thing. Let me just come back in. Hey, look. Now, hey, look, I protected the one I love. So I can restore that VM. And, when it's done restoring, this will take a little bit of time. In fact, are we done? We're done. Okay, so now let's see if we still love each other. Hey, look, right back to where I was when I made the checkpoint, and we still love Linux. So, and all things are good, our relationship can move forward. So, that's checkpoints. Now, this is the tenant experience. You have quota when you create a plan for VMs that allows you to control whether your tenants have the ability to create checkpoints or not, create and restore. One of the things that didn't make it into UR6 was quota-based, not quota-based, quantity-based quotas. So that's one of the things that we're working with the VMM and SPF teams to make happen, is to be able to set and say, hey, I only want my tenants to be able to create 3 checkpoints or 5 checkpoints or whatever, or they can create as many checkpoints as they want, but they can only use an additional 100 megabytes of storage or something like that. So we're working through that. If you have an opinion about how that should work, you still have time to go to our user voice sites and let us know what feature, how you want that feature to work. So Windows Azure Pack does have a future. We are fully committed to mainstream support and quarterly updates with quality fixes as well as security fixes as well as new features every quarter through 2017. And then there's extended support with security fixes through 2022. So if you are working on Windows Azure Pack today, there will be time to use that and get value out of it while we bring Azure Stack through preview and to market, and you guys figure out how to bring it into your data centers and things like that, right? So it will be side by side. We will be developing on both stacks through at least 2017, and then really decide based on where our customers are, whether that's the appropriate time because people have made the move to Azure Stack by that point. I've already talked about the fact that our update release priorities are driven by your feedback, either through our user voice site or our direct interactions with you. And then we will continue to support the new releases of System Center and Windows Server in these timeframes because they're adding capabilities. Like some of you might have seen the shielded VMs that were demoed, right? That's work that we have going on right now. So in UR7, you'll be able to interact with shielded VMs through WAP. So what'll happen with Windows Azure Pack URs is they will support running over a 2012 R2 stack or support running over Windows Server System Center 2016 stack. At this point, we're not able to have them simultaneously registered, but you can have the 2 stacks run separately, and Windows Azure Pack will recognize which stack it's running over from a System Center perspective, and it will light up the appropriate capabilities for admin and tenant. So some of the other things, security group ACLs for the plans that are offered. This is an often requested feature for enterprise customers who want to use AD security groups to basically scope what plans somebody can see when they come into the portal. We talked about the quantity-based quotas for checkpoints. I think another one very popular with service providers is multiple public IP address on a tenant virtual network. So that is something that we're trying to get done for UR7 jointly across the team. A lot of these take multiple teams, the VMM team, sometimes the Hyper-V team, or the networking team, the VMM team, the SPF team, which are kind of the same team, and then the WAP team that's working on kind of the core WAP capabilities, all to do work and get that aligned, right? And so, again, customer feedback is what drives it. So we also have a bunch of partners I mentioned earlier. They either help us integrate into kind of the existing service desk environments you guys might have, the existing control panel environments you guys might have. We have resource provider partners that are plugging in new services. A couple of them are going to announce that they're GA in a session later this afternoon. A couple gallery content partners, and then some infrastructure partners that are basically creating reference architecture. So if you like Cisco UCS, they're doing work. NetApp and Nutanix are all doing work that have kind of white papers that say, with our hardware, here's how you deploy the full stack so that you can offer cloud platform services using Windows Azure Pack. So there's a session this afternoon that I'm doing with 4 partners where we're going to talk about and basically demo their solutions. So that is Cisco Five9, Canube, and Cloud Assert, VMware integration, Azure integration, Cisco application-centric infrastructure, their software-defined networking integration, and then Five9, which is host-based security for tenants. So let's get to the new stuff. Microsoft Azure Stack. I've talked, I think, briefly, I had one slide in my session at TechEd in October. And it was called WAP vNext. So if you've heard us talk about WAP vNext, then this is what we meant. It is a different architecture, and we'll go through that, and I'll talk a little bit about it. But it is the logical strategic successor for Windows Azure Pack and that stack over time. Right? It is, just like in Azure, a side-by-side transition. In Azure, those 2 stacks exist. Resources and services are being moved between the 2 environments. That will play out on-prem because we're bringing those 2 different architectures on-prem as well. But fundamentally, this is about significantly changing how much Azure technology we're bringing to your data center and enabling you to offer consistent services and the continuous delivery of what Azure is doing into your data center. So let's take a look at kind of the components. First, there's the browser experience. I'll spend some time demoing that a little bit later. But then there's a set of user-facing services. Now, one of the first things you'll notice between this diagram and the Windows Azure Pack diagram is there's only one browser experience, right? Everything goes through the same portal site. Everything goes through the same resource manager APIs. And that resource manager is the new service management API, but we used to have a tenant version and an admin version, and same with portals. Everything is now going through this centralized architecture. We can still enable pulling it apart, and there's fancy deployments where if you really don't want any of that being touched, we'll probably support still pulling them apart. But the design is that it'll be secure enough that you won't have to do that. That's our intent. Now, underneath is a set of core management resource providers that are providing core services that integrate with Resource Manager, and then all of the other kind of service RPs interact with. They also provide a user experience and integration for the tenant experience. Now, Azure Stack is also a complete product. It's not a software layer that is installed over System Center and Windows Server. It is a complete product. It has, as a product, the Windows Server-based compute, network, and storage technologies. So there is a Windows Azure Stack Hyper-V. There's a Microsoft Azure Stack. See, I figured I did pretty well, though. I think the storage services, the network controller, these are being delivered in this new product SKU. This is a product SKU that you will install on Metal and then stand up these services above that to offer consistent services to your customers. So a really key part of this next generation architecture is the resource manager. This is the same code. In fact, the PM that was leading the work in bringing this into Azure Stack now is jointly responsible for the Azure version and the Azure Stack version, right? And so same code as is running at global scale in Azure. Now, what's really important about this is it normalizes resource access. So in the Gen 1 architecture, the only thing that was normalized about the APIs was you had to have a subscription, right? And after that, everything was up to the service RP. In ARM, there's a very consistent model of there's a subscription, there's a resource group, and then there's the resources that are contained by that resource group. Now, that's really important because when you want centralized things to do some high-value scenarios, like let's talk about RBAC, the number one user voice item on our site, the number one user voice item on Azure's site. It required this normalization of the APIs because now I can put an RBAC rule at the subscription level, I can put it at a resource group level, or I can put it in an individual resource itself. Right? So this is possible because of this new normalized architecture. Because before that, every service RP would have had to figure out how it implemented RBAC, and I guarantee you they would not have all agreed on the same way to do it. The other huge part of ARM is declarative service templates. So a text file can now describe how to deploy a massive SharePoint farm over these APIs that brings in Windows Server VMs, brings in databases, brings in multi-tiers, brings in what order those all need to be deployed in and wired together in and configured in guest. All of that can be described in a text file that then, using PowerShell, the portal, Visual Studio, you can basically push to the API. It'll take that apart, hand it out to the right resource providers in the right order, and 15 minutes later, you get a massive SharePoint farm. You can go do this today in the Azure portal by going to the marketplace and say, I want to deploy SharePoint. You'll spend 5 minutes filling out some parameters, and then it'll go off and give you a massive SharePoint farm in about 15 minutes. I've heard estimates that that's about a 6-month process trying to get that done in the normal data center on-prem. Right? So the idea is, this is enabling DevOps, all of that stuff's awesome, but it's fundamentally just about automation, flexible automation that allows you to deploy things on the cloud. Doesn't matter whether it's a VM, doesn't matter whether it's a PaaS service, doesn't matter what type of service it is. If it's plugged into ARM, you'll be able to templatize the deployment and provision it automatically through whatever client tools you can have to access that API. Resource groups, we talked a little bit about those. Those are about pulling the resources together into a group, very specific name, resource group. But you're grouping resources that have a similar life cycle, that you want to have similar access policies around, that you want to have, be able to give to a team and let them operate on those or deploy them as a whole or delete them as a whole. Resource tagging, so the ability to go through and put your own custom tags on any resource and have that flow through the system so as usage comes out, you can take a look at usage and then you can sort on your tags. You can sort in the UI on your tags so that you can see, I want to see all the resources that have this tag. So it is a very kind of flexible way of working with the data or working with the resources that are kind of less structured than you have with subscription and resource groups. Multi-region services, we've demoed that a couple of times. And then everything that is a create, update, delete action on resources in the cloud that are going through ARM is logged in the audit log, and that's just another one of those core RPs that you can go and you can browse the audit log and see everything that's happened on a subscription. Right. So it's a very important control point. It minimizes the number of endpoints that you have to have public-facing so that people can interact with it, and then it normalizes the control and logging of all of the actions that are going on in the cloud, at least for everything that's going through ARM. So Portal, I think it's pretty. It is a great experience, very rich personalization, highly scalable UX. Again, we learned a lot from Gen 1 in Azure when we went from 3 services to close to 100, that it got real busy in the UI, and it started being hard for people to interact with all of those services because of the kind of clutter that was in their face all the time because of the architecture and how it was plugged in. There was also the fact that every time you wanted to update the experience for one of those services, you actually had to take down the portal. This is exactly how it works in Windows Azure Pack, because it's the same architecture. When you install one of our partner extensions, you basically are putting code into our directory structure that our process runs. You have to take down our process, put that code in, start our process. Well, then you got to orchestrate the HA of that and all that kind of stuff in order to add a new service or even update the experience of a service. In the new architecture, this can be done continuously, where the core portal is a separate set of processes and a separate set of services, and then there's workflow integration that spans the core into what the resource provider UX extensions are providing. And we'll talk a little bit about that when I do the demo. So, integration across services, and then integrated admin and tenant experience. So we've talked a little bit about that. I won't talk about it more. I'll show it to you later. So, Azure Stack Identity. We had this thing. It was real easy to use, ASP.NET. You could get started very quickly. Turns out a lot of people wanted it to work with Active Directory just as quickly. Well, in the next generation, support 3 modes out of the box. One is Azure AD. If we're going to be doing hybrid things across distant clouds and with an ecosystem, it'd be great if there was one identity system that everybody could be registered with, and then you could just weave people together across those clouds and resources and have full identity control over that. Windows Active Directory, that's what everybody's running in their data centers already, be able to natively plug into that. And then ADFS for when you want federated scenarios that aren't Azure Active Directory. So we do use claims-based identity from any of the clients to the ARM API layer. We then use Windows Auth or basic auth from ARM to the resource providers. So here you're seeing that there's separation of what's going on between when users or other clients are programmatically interacting with the system and the things that are behind the curtain for the service provider, where the core is interacting with the resource providers that are offering the services. And then the resource providers, they'll use Windows Auth to interact with the Azure Stack-based fabrics, but it's really completely determined by the RP. So if you plug in a partner RP, it doesn't have to use WinAuth at that layer. It can use a different auth model. This opens up some interesting things like not all of those pieces need to be on the same site. Right? So these could be remote resources, et cetera. So Shree's got a session Friday at 10:45. So it's late enough that your Thursday night, well, let's just say by this, even with a good cup of coffee, you should be able to make this. But anyways, he's got a great session. He's doing identity capabilities in Azure Pack. But all of the concepts that he's going through, and he'll talk about each of the different types of identity systems, the concepts he's going to go through equally apply to what we're doing in Azure Stack as we go forward. So a great session if you really want to understand deeply how identity works in our architecture, either the Gen 1 or the next generation. Shree's the guy you want to talk to. So, core management services. So, authorization. So, this is where ARM stores RBAC rules. So that you can set RBAC rules against any of the subscriptions, resource groups, or resources. And the authorization service stores those securely, and then Resource Manager interacts with authorization to retrieve them. Excuse me. Subscriptions. So this is where plans, offers, and subscriptions are managed. And these are just ARM resources. Right? I mean, they're special. They're provider-side ones. But the whole idea is that as we build resources that are for operating this cloud, we're going to use them under the same API as tenant resources so that you can do some of the exact same things. Like, wouldn't it be great if you could, just have an ARM template that would allow you to create a new subscription? And then you could use that for automation. The same PowerShell that you use to create a multi-tier application over IaaS, you could use that same PowerShell script to say, go deploy this template that is, give this user a new subscription to that offer. Right? Gallery. So Gallery in Windows Azure Pack was specific to each RP. So there's a websites gallery. There's a VM gallery that has VM roles in it and VM templates in it. Gallery is now a core common service that works across any of the services that are plugged into the cloud. You will be able to put your own gallery items in. The tenants will be able to put their gallery items in to their specific view of the gallery. Right? But this becomes a very powerful thing, especially as we build a really well-populated gallery in Azure. Because everybody who builds something for the Azure gallery is building a consistent artifact that you will be able to deploy in your cloud. Right? And so this is, as we move forward, it's not just about the provider side of the ecosystem, but it's going to be about the ISV and developer ecosystems, the folks that are on top of these APIs. And so the goal is that the work that gets done for Azure will work for Azure Stack when we have those services on-prem. Events. So a lot of events get generated by these services as tenants go and do things. Lots of, yay, success events. Sometimes there's failure events. Being able to see that across the different components within the stack itself, so between portal and ARM and resource provider, in the new Azure architecture, there's a correlation ID. So that you can actually not try to time match events coming from a whole bunch of different places, but you can actually say, I want to see all of the events with this correlation ID, and you can see it walk through the stack. Go down and come back up. So this is a transaction tag that gets passed through the system as something happens in the portal and the API. Monitoring. So there's a standard monitoring. It's called Azure Insights. So it provides basic monitoring, alerting capabilities, et cetera, for things that are going on in the tenant. And then usage services. So being able to gather usage from all of our resource providers, as well as any of our partner resource providers that get plugged in, and providing a normalized usage data flow that you can pour into whatever commerce system you want and have the business models that you want. This is one of the places when it comes to commerce where the Azure Stack on-prem team has to do a bunch of extra work. There is one, or maybe let's just call it 4, but pretty much one business model in Azure. The Microsoft business model for Azure, right? But Azure Stack is going to go out and get deployed by thousands of people that all are trying to differentiate and offer their own business models. So we need to build in the flexibility so that you can get the data, you can create the plans and the offers that you need to support your business model. And so these are where we spend a lot of time, because these can be simpler services in Azure, right? And so these are things that from an API perspective we're trying to make consistent with Azure, but we will often deliver a superset of capabilities that Azure has because we need to support more business models and have more flexibility than the Azure guys do at any point in time. Ooh, it's time. Okay, so a lot of slides so far. Let me switch back over real quick. And actually show you guys this. So what I'm doing here is I'm logging on to the demo environment that we've had for the last couple of weeks that everybody's been using for demos. And chugga, chugga, chugga. I told you, Sri, we should have put more memory in this. That might be, let me double check. All right. After a brief intermission. Yeah, that part's working. Okay. Exactly. All right, there we go. So now you see I'm logging into Azure Stack, the demo environment. Now, this environment is actually integrated with Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, right? So I can log in. I've been set up in the tenant that we're using for demos with my Microsoft account. That's not it. And when I do that, it's actually going to go to Microsoft's corporate login, and because it's using Azure Active Directory, it's actually going to ask me to sign in with my smart card, right? So I have one of those. It's a virtual one, so that's handy. Okay, so now let's see if we get back the dots this time. Wah, wah, wah. You should have seen how long it took 6 months ago. Wow, this is going to be a whole lot of tap dancing if I can't log in. A very lot of tap dancing. What songs would you like me to sing? Yeah, let's do some Q&A. That's a good idea.
You mentioned that Azure Stack can deploy on bare metal.
Yep.
So can you use existing Hyper-V host, or like is the compute different than an out-of-the-box Hyper-V host?
The compute in Azure Stack is based on 2016 Hyper-V. It is self-contained.
So it's like an example with like a 2012 R2 host.
It's a separate product.
Can you repeat that question?
Sorry, the question was, can you install Azure Pack over 2012 R2 Hyper-V? And the answer is, well, you're going to need the 2016 Hyper-V that comes in Azure Stack. Azure Stack is a Hyper-V. It is a scale-out file cluster. It is a new fabric that is cloud-inspired infrastructure that we are then going to layer Azure consistent services on as part of a single product. Yeah?
So is the Azure Stack,
Okay.
is the Azure Stack included in the latest tech review?
Azure Stack won't be in the preview, the technical preview that's coming out next week. It will be in a technical preview later in the year. But general availability will coincide with the 2016 wave. Yeah?
So it'll be a completely separate licensable product?
New product.
Totally new product.
New product. Yeah?
Is it going to be a easy integration with the new service manager?
At this point, we're still going to work with our partner GridPro to integrate with service desks. I think we have, one of the things is there is no service desk in Azure. If you want a service desk to integrate with Azure, it's an external service desk that we then integrate with the Azure processes, right? Azure Stack works the same way. We're going to work with external service desks, and we'll have partners that help do that.
Will there be a migration path if you have customers or clients using Azure Pack? Subscription plans?
So it's a new architecture. So there's a transition that we're working on to be able to move resources from one environment to the other. But it's really important to understand that it's a different stack. And so we're going to move resources, not upgrade the existing Windows Azure Pack environment. And as we've talked to people, most of them have said, hey, we're not just going to flatten our cloud and have it be completely different for people the next day. We'd actually run them side by side anyways, and then help us with the transition. So that's where we're focusing our energy.
Could I ask that everybody with a question please step up to one of the microphones?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
So the question, his question, to repeat it, was, is there a migration between for folks who have installed and using Windows Azure Pack to Azure Stack? Yeah, go ahead.
When do you expect to have an SDK or some other sort of guidance for third-party RP developers?
It will be part of the technical preview. So we're already engaged with our current. Hey, woo! What did you do, Shri? Yeah, we got that far. Oh, that's not good. Do what? Home? Are we? What? Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll do that. No, but what I will do is I'll start the whole thing over again. Because I didn't do enough dancing. So, Q&A, since we won't do it at the end, we'll do it now. I will get this demo to work. So, what's that? Oh, sorry. Partners. So, yeah, we will add more partners, new partners, with the technical preview. So, if you want to engage with Azure Stack, there's two ways to do that. The fastest way is to get yourself nominated for the Windows Server and System Center vNext TAP programs, because those are the people that are going to get the bits first. The other way is if you want to explore ARM templates and the new APIs for compute, network, and storage, you can go do that in Azure today. It's live. You can start there. Whatever you do on those APIs will transfer when we deliver bits on premise. So, yeah.
Two-part question. So the first part is, will the CPS stack be refreshed to use the Azure Stack solution as well? And the second part is, will that combination become available in an open compute form rather than the Dell form at the moment?
Those are really good questions for the Cloud Platform System team.
Will Azure Stack have a concept of hybridized templates where you send a template to either Azure Stack or Azure Public Cloud and it deploys resources across both platforms?
That's something that we're looking at. We know we'll be able to have two partial templates that you can target to each cloud. Having one template, meaning one specific full template, is still the way things work today.
Split and send.
So, but from an automation system, right, you can automate it. And what we found is when people are doing hybrid apps, they're often lifecycle managing the pieces that are in different clouds a little bit independently. And so that's one of the reasons we're looking at it that way. But you'll be able to have a template, two pieces of it, two templates, and then you'll be able to provision them using the same tools to either cloud to set up the different pieces in the different clouds. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned earlier you put some sort of end dates without really saying they were end dates for WAP. Is there a similar thing for System Center and that stack?
Well, the dates that I showed you were the same as the 2012 Windows Server and System Center 2012 R2 dates. They've already announced that there's going to be Windows Server 2016 and System Center 2016, and that will then have a full life cycle from Microsoft, which is a 10-year support commitment. So as far as I know, the answer is absolutely not. There is no plan to not have Windows Server or System Center.
What level of VMware integration will it have?
From a consistent stack perspective, it will have 0. From an open platform perspective and working with our ecosystem, we already have a partner who's planning to have VMware support when we go to public preview.
That's GridPro?
What's that?
Is that GridPro?
GridPro doesn't actually directly support VMware. They support automation that can talk to VMware. But I'll let the partner communicate about that. But I can tell you that there is one that's working on an RP for vSphere so that you can have VM services from VMware in Azure Stack. Okay. Now, I can tell you that you're going to have VMware services that will be inconsistent, but they will plug into this experience and be able to be templatized and have RBAC and all of those other core capabilities. But the same template that is targeting an Azure consistent compute would need to be updated to target VMware compute. Because there are different technical artifacts like VMDK versus VHD. All that stuff's got to get figured out.
Yeah, how about VMM? If that were to mix in, would it integrate via VMM or?
So an important thing is VMM is not in the create a VM path in Azure Stack. So either is SPF. The Azure consistent code comes down to basically the fabric layer, the cluster layer.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
You've talked a lot about consistency between the online or the cloud version and the this now installable version of the stack. Consistency is good. Are you also talking about like full feature parity, for example, all of the IoT stuff that the Azure team is doing?
So Azure Stack as product is not about all of the services that are in Azure. It is very specifically about the foundational infrastructure and platform services that all of those other services in Azure are built on. But as a product, it will contain those services. The other services are making their decision about how they bring that on-premise. We're having conversations with the IoT team, with the SQL team, with the guys who are doing lots of the other big data analysis services, the app services team. So we're having those discussions, but those are going to be business decisions made by those service teams. The big thing that Azure Stack brings is it's going to bring a set of services that are consistent with the ones that they build on in Azure. Because that's one of our architectural issues in Windows Azure Pack is when somebody is built around compute paths and they want to offer their service on-premise, they have to completely rewrite the south end of their service because compute paths doesn't exist in the Windows Azure Pack architecture. And even if they're built on VMs, VMs are operationally different in Windows Azure Pack than they are in Azure. In Azure Stack, those are consistent interfaces, and so it will be easier for those teams to bring their services on-prem. But we're having that conversation. We're taking your feedback, but customers talking to those service teams and saying they want to run their services on Azure Stack is going to be a lot more powerful than us even going and saying we talked to 100 of your customers, and we know that they want your service on-prem. So please give the feedback directly to the service teams. We're going to continue to work with them to bring as many Azure services as we can on Azure Stack.
All right, thanks.
Is the goal, what if you have multiple data centers? Would that be represented as regions within Azure Stack?
Yeah. Yeah, just like it is in Azure. So Azure has, I don't even know how many regions anymore. I stopped counting after about 10. But 15? Okay, 15 regions in Azure. And tomorrow it'll be 45, right? But don't quote me on that. But that's the beauty. And if my demo was working, I'd show you that you can register an RP, and as you register an RP, you basically define what region you want that service to be represented in, right? And then you can have a group of services that are being offered in a region, and then when you define quotas, you define them at the region level so that people can have specific access in specific regions. So we're thinking about multi-data center in a couple of different ways, though. One is think of it as capacity data centers, which says these are geographically separate regions, so I'm going to offer the services, and I might even mix and match some customer access to them. Yeah, don't take that picture. Whoever tweets that, no beta for you. Anyways, two ways we're thinking about multi-data center. One is capacity, so I'm just going to set up regions and people are going to have access to multiple regions. The other way we're thinking about multiple data center is failover. So not just having the resource providers exist in multiple data centers, but having the control plane, the portal, and the Azure Resource Manager operate in multiple data centers so that you can, again, service on, if say a portal wasn't working for some reason, but it was working in the other data center, then tenants would be able to access that. So an HA scenario as well as just multi-region data centers. Yeah?
Is the System Center team looking at providing resource providers for Azure Stack, similar to the vCenter integration from the partner?
So the System Center team is the team that is building the Microsoft.compute resource provider for on-prem. They are using shared code with the Azure compute team, and they're the ones that are building and verifying it on-premise. So yes, but I'm pretty sure that was not the System Center thing you were thinking about.
No, it wasn't. I was thinking more along the lines of VMM resource provider.
Help me understand what you get out of a VMM resource provider that you wouldn't get out of the compute resource provider that we're going to deliver.
Automation-based migration from legacy VMM managed hosts into Stack.
So your scenario description, I believe that's something that we're absolutely looking at. Your implementation of how you get that scenario, we might be thinking a little bit differently about it.
Okay.
So we are absolutely thinking about not only do we have a bunch of VMs that are running on our Gen 1 stack, whether that's in WAP, whether that's in VMM, it could be, say, on VMware, because I hear there's a few VMs on VMware. But you might have seen the Azure Site Recovery team has migration tools that will allow you to take VMs pretty much anywhere and move them into Azure. Well, they're moving them to a set of Azure consistent APIs, and we're going to be delivering a set of consistent APIs on-prem. So we're working with that team to figure out how they would participate in the migration, and then there'll also be the VMM team and the Compute RP team figuring out how they do it as well.
But not necessarily the ability to manage both Stack and legacy.
That is not our intent. I get into this a lot. A lot of people think of WAP as a management layer. We think of it as a platform layer, right? So as a platform, it has management capabilities in it, but it's really about its native resources, and then it has extensibility so other people can add new resource types to it. But our focus is making sure that it is a really well put together platform, right? So that it can deliver a very high level of service for the consistent services that we're building. So at this point, if it's important to you, continue to tell us, participate in the preview, and tell us how important it is. And that's how we change our minds, because sometimes we're wrong. But right now, I think we're looking at, you'll have the old environments that'll work in I said old environments. You'll have the Generation 1 environments, and we're looking to help you transition resources into the next generation stack. But we're not looking to simultaneously support both in the Gen 2 stack, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Is there a projected RTM for this product?
Is there a projected RTM? Is that the question?
Yeah, like a quarter or whatever.
Absolutely. And we're all working really hard to make that, but we're not talking about it other than to say it's part of the 2016 wave, and that will come in 2016. Yeah.
So if there's no real upgrade scenario for transitioning from web to the Azure stack, would I have to put an entire new VMM environment and an entire new operations manager environment next to my original?
That'll be up to you, because it's not technically required to install. I guess I ran out. Azure Stack, new stack.
Yeah, all right.
If you want to use VMM and Ops Manager to manage that, the license will be included so that you can, right? Okay. But it'll be the 2016 versions, for sure. But to provision a VM and have it work, there is no dependency on VMM or Ops Manager.
All right. Thank you.
That's part of bringing more Azure, right, is bringing not Azure just at the portal level or the API level, but down to the resource management level, which is the RP for managing a VM is the Azure code that manages VMs in Azure. Millions of VMs in Azure. And so we're bringing that to you, and that means that what you use VMM for in and around the stack is going to change.
Do you have a recommendation of where to go to stay up to date on Azure Stack and when the preview comes out?
Hey, guess what? I can switch back to slides because I do.
All right.
I'll skip through all of the awesome stuff I was going to demo. One thing I do want to talk about is there are more sessions. So before I get to the URL for more info, there are more sessions. Today, we're doing a partner session around folks that are integrating with WAP. There's also blobs and tables. So this is the storage RP team talking about the storage services we're bringing in Azure Stack. That's at 3:15 today. And then there is Azure IaaS, Azure Pack. Even though it says Azure Pack, it's actually an Azure Stack session. So if you saw the Azure IaaS experience earlier in the week, this will be showing you that in Azure and showing you what we're delivering on-prem. Hopefully their demo works better than mine. And then, let's see, what other? Well, if you're deploying Windows Azure Pack today, I highly recommend going to troubleshooting Windows Azure Pack providers. This is put on by one of our MVPs called, his name's Mark Van Eyck, and he's going to show you some tips and how to really do troubleshooting across the distributed architecture that is WAP vCurrent. And then we talked about Shree's identity solution on Friday. I want to thank everybody both for your humor, for sticking with me as my demo. Well, it didn't really crash and burn. It just never really got started, did it? Oh yeah, more information, sorry. So go to AKMS Azure Stack, and that'll take you to the product page that we have right now and the public information that we have right now. And again, 2 places to engage. If you want bits as soon as possible, talk to folks about getting nominated for the Windows Server System Center vNext program, TAP program, and you can start in Azure today. Everybody got that? I think I'm done. So thank you again for your time. Appreciate it.